Hey, I'm Jusko from ProudMoney.com. Which credit cards would you consider a flex, and which credit cards would you consider maybe a little bit cringe? That's what we are going to talk about in this video. But first, I'm going to ask you to please subscribe to this YouTube channel if you have not already. And if you have already, I thank you for doing so. So the idea behind this video came from two sources. First off, I read an article today. American Express just came out with their latest earnings. And as part of that, in the article, it said that 60% of the new American Express Platinum and American Express Gold card holders are either millennial or Gen Z. Now that is a big range. The oldest millennials are now over 40. The youngest Gen Z aren't even 18 yet. But the point of it was to say that a large number of the people that are getting these cards are younger people, even though maybe in some people's minds the Amex Platinum and the Amex Gold is a little more of a boomerish kind of thing. And so that got me thinking. And then the second thing that got me thinking was I just got this AAA Daily Advantage Visa card because it's got some good stuff going on this card. But I also was thinking to myself, is there anything less cool than AAA? Is there anything that is less of a flex than pulling out a credit card that has the AAA logo on it? Sure, if you're stuck on the side of the road, very helpful, but there's really nothing cool, nothing edgy, nothing that is going to make you want to say, hey, check me out, I got a AAA credit card when you are with friends. I'm alone at the grocery store? Cool. But if I'm at a restaurant or bar and we all are splitting the bill or whatever and I'm putting that card out, it's not the AAA card that I want to be pulling out. Nothing screams old, boring, uncool more than AAA. But I'll take that 5% cash back on groceries. So anyway, that said, which credit cards or credit card companies do you consider sort of being the flex credit cards that you're putting out there with pride, and which of them are a little more cringe? Maybe you're a little embarrassed and maybe you would not put them out there in front of your friends or other people that you might want to impress. So I'm going to run through some cards and credit card companies and tell you what my perception is of the perception of those cards and companies out on the market, and I would love to hear your thoughts as to whether I'm right or wrong in the comments section below. Let's start with that American Express Platinum and Gold, because I think American Express has done a pretty neat trick with these cards, because you very easily could have seen younger people sort of turn their back on the Gold and Platinum and say, that's like, you know, my dad's credit cards or my grandpa's credit cards, and gone for other things instead. But American Express seems like they've done a good job of sort of keeping up that aura of prestige around these cards, and a lot of younger people obviously want to get them. And if you think about what the annual fees are on these cards, and if you really ran the numbers, for a lot of people, it's not necessarily the greatest value on these cards. For some people, yes, you could run the numbers and it would be great. But for a lot of people, I think that idea of prestige, that idea of maybe looking like a little bit of a baller when you pull out the card, or at the very least not being embarrassed when you pull out your credit card, depending on who you were with, I think those things do factor in to people getting these cards as well. So feeling like maybe you've reached a certain level of success where you can actually afford to pay a couple hundred or many more $100 in order to get one of those credit cards, there is something to that as well. So American Express has done a good job of keeping those cards with a little prestige. In terms of other American Express cards, no embarrassment, no cringe with any of the other American Express cards, I don't think, but they're not necessarily anything that is going to be a flex either. But American Express overall still has a pretty good reputation. I'd say the same with Chase. I don't know if there's any prestige around Chase at all, but they're a solid bank that doesn't seem uncool, doesn't necessarily seem cutting edge or flex worthy. Maybe the Chase Sapphire Reserve, when it first came out, seemed like something of like a flex card. I don't know that that is necessarily the case anymore now that it's been on the market for a while. But Chase has a pretty good variety of cards that seem a little more fun on the Chase Freedom Flex end. They're going to put it right there in the card to let you know that you should flex. And, you know, some things that seem more solid on the travel cards and that sort of thing. So Chase, I think, does a pretty good job. No one's ever going to be embarrassed pulling out a Chase card, but I don't know that they're going to, like, you know, impress anyone either. Bank of America, probably the least cool of the major credit card issuers. No one pulls out a Bank of America card with the idea that they're going to impress anyone else. And in some cases, you might even be a little bit like, oh, I don't want to put that Bank of America card out there, especially I think if you're younger. Bank of America is probably even less cool, more nerdy. Maybe if you're older and you're a little more conservative, Bank of America fits your overall vibe that you're going for. But I don't think think anyone would say Bank of America is on the cutting edge. Now, Capital One is a company that I think has changed over time. It used to be that really Capital One, I think, was more of sort of a stepping stone company in terms of getting credit cards from them. You got a card from them as a stepping stone up to some other cards from other issuers, because a lot of what Capital One would do would be things where you didn't have as much credit history, you were going to get smaller credit lines, maybe you didn't have as much income. Capital One was friendly to you, and so you would kind of go there when you first needed credit cards, but you were maybe hoping that you were going to eventually sort of graduate up to a higher level. But I think that has changed with Capital One, in particular with the Saver cards that are very good cards. The Venture X in particular, I think, has sort of changed the idea a little bit of what Capital One is. Capital One still is that stepping stone company to a certain extent with some of their cards, but I think they have pretty successfully sort of moved into a place where their cards have some flex value, or at least some of their cards have some flex value, and they probably, by burnishing their image, improving their image a little bit, they probably have even made those stepping stone cards not cringe, not that they were ever cringe, but even less so now. So Capital One's done a pretty good job of shining up their image. Citibank has some interesting credit cards going on. I would say overall, though, they're not cool or uncool. Maybe the Citi Custom Cash has a little bit of a flex factor going on these days, but the rest of their cards, not so much. Still better than Bank of America. Now, Discover is a company that sort of stopped where Capital One used to be. Their cards are, and they seem to see this as their sweet spot, their cards are oftentimes starter cards. The way they went after my kids for their first credit card showed me that the younger demographic is definitely one they go after hard. They often are sort of stepping stone cards. Now, they may hope that you stay in Discover for the long haul, and some of their cards are pretty good. I have a Discover card, and I think it's good. But you don't see Discover card as the company or the card that you are pulling out to impress anyone. There's no real flex value with Discover. There's nothing cringy necessarily about Discover. But anyway, one thing with Discover, they do have these designs where you can customize your card, and I have the Discover boombox design, and I know some people have the old cassette tape design, and there's different colors, and there's, you know, animals, and there's sports, and there's flags, and there's all kinds of different Discover cards out there. Now, I think that's kind of fun, and depending on who I am with, sometimes I'll pull this out with a little pride, and there's maybe a little flex factor to it if they didn't know that you could do this. And then in other cases, maybe not so much. Maybe I'm like, well, maybe it's gonna feel a little cringy to pull out the boombox design if I'm at a, you know, business lunch. Not that I'm ever at business lunches, but if I was, maybe I wouldn't choose this as the #1 card that I would pull out if I felt like I was trying to look a little more professional to the people, especially if I did not know them very well. Now, US Bank is a card issuer that I have a little harder time pinning down what I think the perception is of them. I'm not even sure if there is a perception of them unless you're someone that's really into credit cards. They do have interesting products with the Cash Plus and the Altitude Go, and I know some people really love the Altitude Reserve card from them. So there are people that are very into some of these US Bank cards. I don't know if any of them are flex worthy so much, partially because I think a lot of people don't know anything about US Bank, and so if you're putting the US Bank card out there, you're more likely to get a kind of stare from other people that don't really pay attention to the credit card market than you would anything of like, oh, is that the new Altitude Go, or is that the new Altitude Reserve, or the Cash Plus? That's a good one. You know, you're not getting any of that with US Bank. So some good cards, but not a lot of cachet. Wells Fargo has no flex at all, maybe even a little bit of a cringe factor with Wells Fargo for reasons that go beyond just their credit card operations. They're doing some interesting things with credit cards, have some good products, but Wells Fargo is not a name that anyone is going to be flexing around about in the near future, saying, hey, check me out, I got a Wells Fargo credit card. Over time, they may be able to kind of turn the ship around, but right now, Wells Fargo probably more cringe than flex. Now, the vast majority of people in the United States are probably pro-military, or at least pro-military members. So if you are someone that has a Navy Federal Credit Union card or a USAA credit card and you take that out when you are with a group of people, I don't know if it has a flex value necessarily, but it definitely has a respect value. Nobody is going to look at that and go, ooh, Navy Federal Credit Union, or anything of that nature. So there's definitely no cringe factor. I would say there's a respect factor, maybe a little bit of a flex factor. Now, I've mostly just talked about the major issuers. There are a lot of other credit cards out there from sort of startup fintech companies and that sort of thing that I'm not really going to go into too much, and maybe you will go into them in the comments below if you have one of those cards to tell me whether you think something like, I don't know, the Venmo Visa or something has a real flex factor. But the other card that I do want to mention that is in that group is the X1 Visa, because I'm really sort of on the fence in terms of what I think the perception is of this card. So when it first was talked about before it was open to the public, people were, all getting on the wait list, and they thought this was a really great card and it was a metal card and all this sort of thing. And it seemed like it appealed more to a younger demographic. And now there's a good number of people that have the X1 Visa. And so I'm not quite sure what I think about it. Maybe it has a flex factor if you are under a certain age, because it's a little more flashy and it's something that, there's some talk about as it was on this waiting list and all that kind of stuff. And then if you had the X1 Visa though and you pulled it out with sort of a group of people that were older and didn't know anything about it, they might look at it a little bit like, what is that thing? It looks a little bit like a toy credit card. So I'm not sure what the perception is of the X1. And maybe that's true of some of the other startup cards out there when they're not from a bank that people recognize or not from a company that people recognize. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that as well. Oh, and that's actually the end. So those are my sort of off-the-cuff thoughts about some cards and some credit card companies. Again, would love to hear your thoughts. What do you pull out with pride? What do you smack down on that table and say, look at me? Or what do you be like, I hope no one notices which card I'm putting out there? I would love to hear all about it in the comments section below. Otherwise, I thank you for watching, and as always, please go to proudmoney.com, where we do credit card reviews, we talk personal finance, we talk deals, and all sorts of other fun stuff too. If you're not going to leave a comment or go to the website, watch this video.